that each meeting for 5 minutes, just to make sure we don't lose any direction we had from a previous meeting. So if everybody's okay with the minutes, can I get a motion for the adoption of the minutes for the last meeting? Councillor Vale, thank you. You'll move that. Seconded by Jill. Will you second that? You were at the meeting? Yep, thank you. Any comments, questions? All in favor? We're good. Thank you. So business arising from the minutes. So we talked about just a couple of things. One was the memo. I do have a memo going to council on the 23rd of June. It's just a memo we talked about waiving some of these special event permits, patio permits, inspection permits for outdoor patios. We're going to put in there to waive the noise exemption fee for the application. Just so that if somebody has a band or a special event, they still have to apply for the noise exemption, but there won't be a $75 fee. We're going to propose that the park vendor permits for farmers markets be waived, the monthly fee for this year, and proposing that all park rental fees be waived as well. So we're just trying to, as usual, when you talk about the government, we need to find a legal way to do it. Apparently, by waiving fees, we're bonusing some private businesses and restaurants, and we're not allowed to do that. So we're just working through the legality of how do we do this and sort of keep us, as mentioned before, between the lines. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to make a motion or propose a motion to allow for the outdoor expansion of retail and patio space within privately owned parking spaces, and that no approval will be required by the city for the expansion of outdoor retail or patio space within privately owned parking spaces, provided that all accessibility standards related to parking and public access are still maintained. So Chris can weigh in, but this is really just, there's a zoning requirement for so many parking places for a private business. And obviously, if they expand under their parking lot, then they're taking up some parking places they're probably legislated to have. But our reading of it, if by the province allowing this to happen, it's Provincial Planning Act, and by the province allowing these spaces to expand and waiving the liquor license for them, they're basically saying that we're giving us the authority to waive the municipal zoning requirement for those parking places on a temporary basis. So other municipalities have done that motion, so that's what we're going to take forward. So that's the memo I'm going to bring forward, and we had that discussion at the last meeting. So if anybody doesn't have any objections, we'll proceed with that. We did get a breakdown from Chris on the development process, all 130 pages of it. Thank you, Chris. That was awesome. I'm not sure where to go with this. I just really wanted to send this to you. I don't think this task force's mandate is to start going through this page by page and sort of figuring out how do we change this? How do we do this differently? But I thought before we had a discussion about the whole process, we should all have that background information. So we're certainly going to talk about how are there ways the process can be changed or can be improved? But one of the directions I'd like to go, I think, for the next meeting, and we can get into it when we get down to development approvals, but that was the breakdown for the development process. Was there any questions on that just before we move on? It was just sort of some background information on the whole. Everybody good? Okay. And then the roundtable discussion. Yep.
Andy,
go ahead. Yep.
Sorry, I wasn't really sure what people were looking for in this particular motion, and so I'm certainly happy to walk people through one application type just to kind of give them a sense of the steps in the process. I do teach a course in planning at Fleming College, so I have any number of PowerPoint presentations, and I could go through, those to explain, what planning is and how it works. But I don't know, maybe I could just provide an overview of the sort of the bigger picture planning legislation, and then go through maybe just one of the application processes, like a rezoning, just to kind of give them a sense of how the process works. I don't know. wasn't quite sure what people were looking for, so happy to get into as much detail or as little detail as people feel they need.
Yeah, no, and I think that was good, Chris. I mean, I didn't realize, and obviously that's the complexity of the Planning Act and all the different applications that come in. So it was, I think it was good background information. I think when we get down to item 8, that's where we'll have a bit of a discussion, and maybe you can give us an overview, and then we can dive into that if anybody has any questions and spend a little bit of time on that, just seeing where we want to go from there. But let's do that when we get down to the core of the agenda, if that's all right. 5.2, the roundtable discussion was, we talked about the Kickstart the Shop Local campaign. I know signage and putting together a bit of a message. So I'll just ask Rebecca where we are with that. I know that was part of the direction from the committee. Go ahead.
The Shop Local campaign is in development at the moment, and I can speak later to it on the agenda if you would like.
How about the message we talked about with tourism and stuff, and sort of starting to invite people out? Is that something we're gearing up for Canada Day weekend, or the I guess Canada Day is not a weekend, but that week, do we have a time frame on when we'll have something to sort of turn that corner? I know Jill was inquiring about that the last time.
Yes. So Jill has been part of the discussion on what that messaging is. The focus of that messaging at the current point in time is very much in line with how you have been speaking to the media about Kawartha Lakes is open for people to come up to. Be safe when you're coming up. If you've got a cottage here, you're welcome. You're a resident in this area. And so we are in the Shop Local campaign that's got a real focus on the local resident, but that messaging really speaks to the tourism campaign that is under construction at the moment as well, with a real focus on ideas that are supporting isolation and freedom and the outdoors, with a focus on neighbouring communities and GTA-based residents that are familiar with Kawartha Lakes. So not doing an outreach to the whole of Ontario for people who don't understand or have not come to this area previously, but focusing on people who frequently visit, have some kind of connection to this area. And we're talking about freedom, outdoors, engaging safely while you're up here. Jill might have something better to share to that.
Okay, so when we get down to that business recovery, then we can maybe have a discussion about that. I just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost that we were working on it. And then the only other that came out of the minutes was a list of projects was requested by Councillor O'Reilly regarding anything under appeal, just for information. And I know that list was forwarded. Is that what you were looking for, Councillor O'Reilly? I'll take that as a yes. You have to take yourself off mute, Councillor, if you're going to participate, but we've got our list of appeals. So let's move down to new business. The new business we have, I know Tom is in another meeting. He's going to join us, but you all received a memorandum about a new appointee. The terms of reference allowed us to appoint up to 4 people. And the college had approached us about Tom Phillips, and the information was on your memo. It seems a good fit for what we're trying to do. And I'm just put it out to the committee to see where you want to go with filling that final seat for now. I think the college is a great partner for the municipality, and they certainly bring lots to the table. And Tom, certainly people that know Tom have spoken very highly of him to me. So I would propose we add him as our fourth public appointee to the committee. But any comments from anybody, or anybody want to move that, or what do you want to do? Councillor O'Reilly?
Can you hear me, Andy?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, I move it. Tom's involved with a number of projects in our community through the college, and he has a great background, and I think he would be a great addition to our committee.
Okay, so you'll move that. Kathleen, you had your hand up. Will you second that? Is that okay? Anybody want to comment or add anything? Okay, I'll call the question then, that Tom Phillips be appointed as our fourth appointee. We have a mover and a seconder. Anyone, all in favor? Motion's passed. Thank you. So we'll welcome Tom when he joins us. So we'll move down to item 7, which is the infrastructure stimulus. I don't think we'll spend too much time on this one today. We got a brief overview of it the last time. We have some information, but I want to spend a little more time on the development approvals and the business recovery at this meeting. I don't want to go 2 hours like we did last time, so I'm targeting about an hour and a half. That's our goal. So let's just leave infrastructure stimulus. Is there anything anybody wanted to bring up regarding infrastructure stimulus before I just plow through it, or we'll go right on to the development approvals and ask Chris to give us sort of a quick overview. And then I have invited Christina Sisson. I wanted to join us because she's got a few ideas from an engineering perspective and a planning perspective on how we might be able to work on a few things. So is there anything on infrastructure stimulus anybody wanted to bring up before we move on to item 8? We're good. Okay, so let's go down to item 8, development approvals. As we mentioned, we all got a breakdown of that process. You know, it's a complicated process, and every application is different, so it certainly has its challenges. And I think what we're trying to do as a committee is really just, you know, are there some ways that we can help with that process? Is there some things that could be done a little bit differently? And, you know, I don't think a lot of this committee has the expertise to start diving into the Planning Act and, you know, what can we change here? What can we change there? But I think we have an opportunity with this pandemic, if that's the right way to put it, that, you know, we have a situation where things are a little bit more fluent and a little bit more flexible from the province. And if nothing else, from now till the end of the year, I think there's an opportunity for us to, I don't want to say cut corners, but to just look at how can we take some of these important projects and move them forward and add some stimulus to sort of move them through the process. And one of the things I think we should look at is, you know, let's maybe what we can do, Chris, at some point is get a list of outstanding applications that the city has right now, maybe for the next meeting. And I don't know what I'm asking you if this is a ton of work, but I would like to see a list of outstanding applications, and then maybe this committee could get them and we can have a look through them, and maybe we can help prioritize them and then help come up with ways that, you know, how do we take these top 10 projects that are the biggest stimulus to the city moving forward, and how do we get them, you know, through the process quicker than maybe some of the other ones. So it might be worthy of a discussion, but I'll turn it over to you for now, Chris, if you want to give us a bit of an overview on that process or one part of it, and then we can see if there's any questions moving forward. So go ahead, Chris.
I'm going to try and share my screen here, so see if I do this successfully or not. So have you got the land use planning policy in Ontario picture in front of you?
Yep, we do. Yeah.
Okay. So just to give you a sense of the kind of the big picture view of planning in the province of Ontario. So at the top of the heap is the Planning Act. And so the Planning Act is the legislation that all municipalities have to follow when they're going through their planning processes. It outlines the zoning, the official plan, how you put an official plan together, what you have to include in an official plan, what you can and can't do with zoning, you know, how you deal with heritage, how you deal with parks and subdivisions, and all of the applications are all listed in the Planning Act and the processes that are legislated as in that Planning Act. So we are somewhat or wholly, you know, mandated to follow the process that we follow. We have very little in the way of flexibility there. So they mandate, you know, how long, when somebody hands in an application, how long we have to deem that application complete. They mandate how long we have to give people notice before it goes to a public hearing. It's mandated how long you have to give people notice after you've made a decision. So there's all these timeframes that are mandated and that we can't cut in half or make more efficient. Unfortunately, those are mandated timeframes. So even if you were to take all those timeframes and put them into, you know, the quickest, fastest way you could do it, you're still looking for a rezoning at about 3 months at the absolute kind of, you know, minimum, with no complications, variables, holdups of any kind. So it's a fairly lengthy process, even at its most lean and mean form, just because of those mandated timeframes. So the Planning Act is the overall document that provides us the legislation around which how we do our planning. Underneath the Planning Act is the provincial policy statement. So the provincial policy statement, the PPS that you might hear people say in short, is the document that sort of speaks to how the sort of philosophical way in which the province wants all communities to develop in the future. And it really speaks to wanting to focus development in the settlement areas, what they call the settlement areas where the services are, and to make really good, efficient use of those services. So before we go into that sort of greenfield development that people talk about, sort of spreading our development out into the rural areas, into our, environmentally sensitive areas, our agricultural lands, all of those lands that we want to keep intact, before we start spreading out into those areas, the provincial policy statement says make better use of the existing developed area within those serviced areas. So, for instance, redevelop single family areas into higher density areas where you have those services already in place. Do infill projects. So if you have vacant lands within your settlement area, build those first before you start thinking about going out into the hinterlands. And they actually mandate in the provincial policy, so that provincial policy statement gives that sort of overall view of how they would like to see development happen. Under the provincial policy statement is what they call the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And that growth plan is a plan for all the GTA communities, of which we're one. We're on the sort of eastern perimeter of that growth plan area. But that growth plan dictates what amount of the growth in the GTA area we must take, and how we develop and accommodate for that growth. So they have said that by 2031, we will grow from 75,000 to 100,000. That's 25,000 people. They mandate what percentage of those increased residential properties have to be within that settlement area, and how much can go outside that settlement area, and how much can go into the rural areas. And we're mandated again to ensure that we develop the way they have outlined that for us. And then going down from that, our official plan has to match the growth plan, the provincial policy statement and the Planning Act. Our zoning has to match our OP, our official plan, our growth plan, our provincial policy statement and Planning Act. So everything kind of tiers down through all of that legislation. And our council and the planners are required to follow that legislation. We cannot veer from it. So that's just a very quick overview of the planning policy, and maybe I'll just stop it there and see if anybody has any questions about that.
Can you just take your screen down, screen share, Chris, just so I'll see if there's any questions, because I can't see them while that's up there. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any questions anybody has just on that portion that Chris? Juan, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Andy. Chris, can you touch on the minister zoning process? I know that's relatively new, but have you investigated the process for that? My understanding is that speeds up the process and it makes our best case scenario even better. But I'm not sure if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, so there's a ministerial policy in the Planning Act that allows for the minister to overrule appeal processes. So and the zoning process. So if, for instance, there is an applicant who, and I actually had a meeting with a lawyer who explained the process to us recently. as part of a different application, but he gave the example of if you had, let's say, an industrial zoned and designated area, and you wanted to make that area a residential area, and you could identify that this was in the provincial interest and the community's interest, you can actually write the zoning for that development and send that to the minister, and the minister can create that zoning without going through a rezoning process. The lawyer said that you're looking at a minimum a minimum of 2 months kind of turnaround, the quickest he's ever seen that process. But he said it can be as long as 14 months to go through that process. So it's not necessarily faster, but the thing that's really attractive to somebody going through this process is that it can't be appealed. So you're getting rid of the appeal process. So it might be a little faster going through this as a rezoning process, but it definitely is faster when you take into account the fact that it can't be appealed. So we had an example of a subdivision that was going through the final phase of the subdivision. The zoning's in place. They needed a rezoning, but they were suggesting that they try this ministerial zoning process, and we kind of talked through the time frames, and I mean, it's not something you want to take every single process through, because there's a reason why you have a planning process. The public does have the right to comment on these things and provide input. So you wouldn't want to take all your planning processes and say, this is the process we're going to use. I have heard that the minister is anxious to get development going, and it's not a matter of a minimum number of these things that he's willing to consider. He's looking at doing as many as are feasible and rational and make sense. It's definitely quicker process, but the most important thing is it can't be appealed.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly, you had a question? Go ahead.
It was almost like the same question as Juan had, and I'm just wondering further to your answer, Chris, is this something that's going to be temporary as a result of COVID-19, or is this something that's going to be ongoing, or do you know that?
It's been around for many years, but it's rarely been used. It's obviously politically difficult, because you can imagine there'd be a lot of pushback from communities that are getting what they would consider sort of railroaded, and of course, politicians have friends, and they have, and so there's certainly a perception that if a developer gets something pushed through by a minister, that obviously has its sensitivities. So it's been around for a long time, but it hasn't been used. It's very rarely used. But it sounds like this minister is willing to consider it as part of his process.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Hi. So are we going to be doing this for the subdivision you were speaking about, Chris?
So we had a meeting with the applicant, and it's up to them. We've said we're open to considering it. And so what they would need to do is create the zoning, write up the zoning, and prepare it, and then that gets submitted to the minister. And again, it might be faster going through that process in terms of the zoning process, but that remains to be seen. But we did express our support for it, and particularly in that case, just because it doesn't really change the nature of that development. Yeah, we were supportive of it in our discussions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Chris on that portion of it? Do you have anything you want to go on to after that, Chris? Is there more?
So I'm happy to walk people through an application process if that's of interest, or that's something that people would be interested in hearing. But it's up to you guys. I was suggesting I could kind of walk you through a rezoning process, just because that's kind of one of our main processes, but not sure if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just see if is there any general questions just on the information that Chris sent out? I have a couple, and I think I want to have a bit of a conversation on, the process. And when you say if, the biggest thing that jumps out at me from my experience in being here and dealing with developers and applicants and the planning department is that, once you receive a complete application, nothing can be done until an application is complete. And getting a complete application can sometimes, when a developer walks in or somebody wants something, they walk into the counter, this is what I want to do, here's my application. It could take them months to get a complete application because they need this, 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 this. Number one, I guess I would like to know, how do they know what it is that's required for their application? Do we have a checklist or a brochure that you give them depending on, what it is they're applying for? I know we have a pre-consultation process, which I'm a big fan of. I think I've heard good comments from people. I guess one of my thoughts is that I just wondered if you could comment on was, if I hand in a complete application, you're saying if everything goes according to plan, that's a 3-month. We'll say a 3 to 6 month is pretty standard for a zoning amendment or a zoning application. But how long does it take if I walked in and I said, I want to put this in, and you said to me, well, I need to get a pre-consultation meeting set up? I mean, is that something that happens fairly quickly, or are we waiting 3 months to get a pre-consultation so that, that application might be done properly, but until we have the pre-consultation, I mean, it's a good process because it lets everybody know what's required, but are we delayed in that process right now for various reasons that it's taking people a long time to get into the system, therefore adding to the time, the length of time that they want to actually do something? And I just wondered if you could comment on that. How are we doing some of those online? I mean, have we changed some things around virtually, or maybe you could just touch on that pre-consultation process if you don't mind.
So when I first started here, shortly after I started here, I was asked to put a task force together to kind of review the whole development process and planning building departments. And we put a 20-person task force team together. We did surveys, we did outreach to the communities, held a number of public meetings, interviewed developers. We did something similar to what Rebecca's doing now, which is to interview applicants and find out what worked and what didn't work. And one of the many things that we came up with was that the pre-consultation process, which is important in terms of identifying what's needed as part of an application, was backlogged about 3 months. So before anybody could even consider submitting an application, they had to have to go through the pre-consultation, and they were looking at a 3-month wait. And that was because we were only holding one pre-consultation meeting a month. And so we were only able to get through about 6 of these a month. And 6 of these applications takes a full day, pretty much. So, so what we did was we doubled the number of meetings. We did them every 2 weeks instead of once a month. We did 4 per meeting, and we managed to get through pretty much most of the backlog. And so now we're looking at about a 2-week, or we're looking at about a 2-week to a month delay, as opposed to 3 months, to get onto that pre-consultation agenda. Because of the backlog in the pandemic situation, we are now looking at about a 6-week delay. We were holding in-person pre-consultation meetings, and for those of you that don't know what a pre-consultation meeting is, it's a meeting whereby before a person applies, we meet with the applicant, and all of the sort of people that will have an interest in that application are sitting at a table. So Christina and in the engineering department would be there. a couple of the planners, building inspectors, fire department, KRCA. So all the Ministry of Transportation has a representative that drives all the way from Kingston, believe it or not, for this meeting. So anyway, it's all the interested people that would have an interest in that application are sitting at the table. And so we're able to give the applicant a very comprehensive list of the issues and reports and studies and things that they will need to be associated with their application and to make their application a complete application. Since the pandemic has hit, we obviously haven't been able to meet in person. So what the planners are now doing instead is they're packaging up 4 of these pre-consultation reports. So we put a whole background report together for the pre-consultation meetings that we normally have. And then after the meeting, we provide a summary of what was said at that meeting so the applicant has all that information. So now instead of the actual meeting, what we're doing is we're putting, say, every 2 weeks, we're putting 4 of these applications in a package and we're referring them around to all of these agencies. And we're getting feedback, via email and digitally. And then if it's a fairly minor application, isn't that complicated, then we just send that information on to the applicant. If it's more complicated and there's more information that we feel needs to happen, we set up a Zoom meeting with the applicant and kind of go over the comments that we've received from the various agencies. So we've adjusted the process so we're now hitting 4 every 2 weeks. And like I say, we're running about 6 weeks behind right now, but we're just in a sort of catch-up mode.
Okay, thank you for that. And I notice on your sheet it says that you can waive. You have the authority to waive the pre-consultation if an application is considered to be minor and it determined that the pre-consultation is not required. Is that something that you utilize very often? If it's not a huge application, we don't necessarily need to go through that whole process. How often do you use that authority and waive it?
Not that often, because it is a really good process to get all the information to the applicant in one fell swoop. To kind of piecemeal these things is not the best because things get missed. You're just not getting all the input from all the people that you might need. But there's certainly many examples of minor things that come up, and I just say, it's not worth it. It's too simple, or it's not that complicated. So let's just not bother. And it might be an application that's coming back. So you might have a subdivision that lapses, and all of the information's pretty much already there. They're just coming back with the same application because it lapsed. So in a case like that, I would also say, maybe we don't need the pre-consultation, but I don't use it a lot. I'd say, maybe 5 times a year or something like that.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring Christina in if that's okay, just to sort of get her comments, but I see Tom Phillips has joined us. We've just nominated Tom to be on our committee. We've made him the chair, so we'll just turn the meeting over to him. Thanks, Tom. I'll just go across the board real quick so that you know everybody. I'm Andy Latham, the mayor. Chris Marshall is beside me. He's the director of development services. Councillor Pat O'Reilly is the vice chair and the deputy mayor. Wendy Ellis is beside him, who's the EA for development services. Christina Sisson is below him, who we're going to hear from shortly. I'm sorry, Christina, is it manager of engineering?
Supervisor development engineering.
Supervisor development engineering, thank you. And Councillor Vale is beside him. Bjorn Alfredson is one of our public appointees, used to be the owner of Holseg Canada. So from a business perspective, value his opinion. Rebecca Mustard is our know-it-all for economic development, our manager of economic development. So we're leaning quite heavily on them. Below her is Councillor Kathleen Seymour-Fagan up in the Bobcaygeon area. And beside her is Mark Wilson, who's another one of our public appointees, who's a developer here in Lindsay, a builder and a developer. worked on many local projects, certainly bringing some development insight. Then we have Jill. Jill Quast is beside her. She's from Happy Days Houseboats up on Pigeon Lake, and certainly been involved in tourism for the Kawartha Lakes for quite a while. And then beside him is Juan Rojas, who is our director of engineering, who is just sort of rounds out the committee, and yourself, Tom. So welcome on board. We did officially add you to the committee earlier regarding a memo. So we appreciate you taking the time. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself or say hi for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting me to be involved, because as many know, I've been very involved in Fleming College and post-secondary education for a lot of years, and I'm an economist very much involved in community economic development. And so I'm thrilled to be involved. These are challenging times and we need creative solutions. And I think the diversity of opinions and perspectives will help us make this recovery lead to a better place than we were before it. It's going to be a challenge, but I think we're up for it, and we see that there is community commitment to a recovery. So I'm thrilled to be involved.
Thank you for that, and we're thrilled to have you. And don't be shy. I mean, anything that we're looking for. We don't want to waste anybody's time here. So any ideas you have or anything that's a little bit different, this is an opportunity I think we have with this pandemic to think a little bit differently and do things a little bit differently. And right now we're just I won't say we're picking on Chris Marshall, but we're working on the development process to just to get a little bit of background and see if there's any ways that we can get some different opinions on prioritizing some of those applications or helping speed up the process a little bit in certain areas. It's complicated. It's every application's different, and I know from Chris's perspective, we were just going over the pre-consultation, and I will say I've had a few people that have called me that, when he says the pre-consultation process is a good one, I've had many people call me and say that it is a good one. They've got a lot out of it. I've also had other developers call me to, where they're struggling later on in the process, call me and say, I went back to planning and they told me that they didn't tell me that I needed to do this, and now they're telling me. And, did they not tell you that during pre-consultation? Oh, I waived the pre-consultation process. I just wanted to get right to the application. So, it's a little bit of both. We all hear things out in the community, and I will say I think it's a process that works. I know there's timelines that we don't have a lot of say in, but I'm a firm believer there's always ways that we can make it better, and we can improve on that. So I just want to turn it over to Christina Sisson for a minute, if I can. If Christina has been involved in the process for a while, more so from the engineering perspective, but just by being involved in that development process, Christina, is there anything you can share with us before we go ahead? Go ahead.
I just saw Councillor O'Reilly had his hand up for perhaps a question.
No, just thanks, Christine. Just as we're leaving, we talked to Chris about the pre-consultation, and I agree. I think some of the challenges that come from the pre-consultation and the time frame is that they've addressed many of them, but we're surrounded by a number of small municipalities like Peterborough County, and a lot of the developers are used to just walking into those small little townships and getting their requests dealt with fairly quickly, even though they probably still have to get the county involved or the region as well. But that's just, I think, in fairness to our pre-consultation, that they feel as though that's a little more cumbersome, and we have addressed a lot of their concerns, as Chris has mentioned. And but I think it's the smaller townships that they right beside us that they're used to dealing with. Just a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and appreciate that. We're not moving away from this process by any means. I'm just, I wanted to loop Christine in and comment on it from sort of an inside perspective, go from there. So I'll turn it over to you, Christina. Go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Letham. I think one of the aspects that we've looked at through pre-consultation a few times, and as Chris outlined for everyone, there was the task force, and one of the items that had come up was the aspects or the projects developments that go forward to pre-consultation are where we're creating development. So it would be, or creating opportunities. That would be consents, anything that requires a rezoning, and subdivision or condominium development. Site plans do not, according to our current bylaw, go forward for any kind of pre-consultation. So we usually have a separate and distinct meeting with respect to site plans that go forward, and a site plan is a private development. They're not creating public infrastructure. So the challenge that we've seen is, as outlined, we were completing 6 of them in an afternoon, and then we were going into a longer day because some of them do take more than the half hour. They could take a full hour. And then when we added the extra week, we've stuck to just afternoons. So we do it twice a month in the afternoons, and that allows for 4 each typically. So we've gained a bit of ground there, but one of the things that has come up is whether there's an opportunity in that monthly time frame to say the first meeting of the month might be more the generic type of pre-consultation, perhaps the simpler items that aren't as difficult to review with respect to consents, etc. And we could reserve the later time in the month, or vice versa, for some of the more expansive projects, massive subdivisions where they're proposing 50, 60, 70 lots type of thing. So that's one aspect. That way we could maybe streamline our reviews and our summary reports. We have had some delay on the summary reports going back out, so that's a bit of frustration as well, I know. So we've also talked about the advantages of today's technology and using this type of a forum whereby if we had a lot of it electronically available as well, then we could have potentially Zoom meetings and have it recorded so it wouldn't take so long to provide reports afterwards. But the real reason I believe that and has asked me to speak here is that one of the opportunities that comes as a result of the site plan process is people coming in and saying they want to do a private development, they want to build an independent private structure. So it might be with respect to, I don't know, we've had farm credit go that way, we've had other site plans come that way, and the opportunity is for that initial conversation. And some municipalities do this. They have the pre-consultation process whereby someone who has a potential development, and that could be a major developer, a land developer or a builder, or it could be a mom and pop. And that's where we're trying to distinguish between, perhaps there's 2 layers that we could look at through this process. We still want to be there for our independent contractors, our independent developers, as I say, a mom and pop type shop that wants to try something different. But we also need to be able to be ready, prepared for these meetings with respect to major development. And when I get to that point, I'm suggesting from an economic recovery that what we want to be able to focus our energies on and try to jumpstart, kickstart, and get moving quickly are those projects which are, as Chris has mentioned, are in the urban area, are connected or have the potential to be connected to our municipal services, currently have some of the zoning in place. So we're not, and again, our zoning is antiquated, and I know we're working on consolidating the zoning bylaws, et cetera, but that is part of our challenge. Sometimes it's not that the idea or the development process or the development project is not acceptable for that area. It's that our zoning didn't comply with that. So again, if there's a minor tweak to the zoning, it's a matter of, and often when we have a rezoning, we allow people to continue with the site plan process in parallel. And I guess that's where we're saying if we could get some of that information ahead of time, if the utilities are in place, if the services are in place, municipal services, water, sanitary, storm, etc., if there's a road network there already, then is there a way to take that through a first tier lens, review those from a different perspective so that we can try to keep the ones that have the majority of the checklist that's being spoken of cleared or partially cleared or almost there? Then we could focus those energies on getting those groups ahead of the other ones, which may take longer. If you're looking to create a lot, for instance, in the floodplain, it's not really permissible under the Planning Act, under the 2020 PPS or the previous PPS. It's not really part of our official plan. So when you're going down the triangle that Chris has shown you of the different approvals, if it's not really ideal in any of the layers of the triangle, then we really should be putting that in a different box or in a different stream, in my opinion. Whereas if what you're proposing, is a commercial development, let's just say near a provincial highway and one of our collector roads, then you start to say, these are the items that we have, and maybe our predecessors have already approved in some way, shape, or form. So we have a secondary plan in place. Some of those items where we've already had the discussion, or there's been some approvals, we worked through the conservation authority areas of concern, etc. I feel that there's two streams, but it takes that dialogue and it takes that checklist and it takes that knowledge from within the organization to understand where are those locations and what can we support. And that's what we would like to, we try and do this every pre-consultation review that we do from an engineering perspective, because again, connected to our services without causing additional strain. Don't know if there's any question.
That's great. Thank you. So just for clarification, so when you say a site plan process is not part of the pre-consultation, so a site plan, and I don't know everybody's knowledge on site plans, but I'll just, like if somebody comes in and they have the proper zoning on their property, they have the, it's within, like you say, the specific area, they want to build homes, it's already zoned for a subdivision. They come in and a site plan is really just how they're going to lay out that proposal to build it, correct? I mean, is that what you're talking about? Because when we do a pre-consultation, I mean, if it's a zoning, like say the one at Kraft at Highway 35, I mean, they came in and had to do a rezoning, an official plan amendment. And then when that's done, then they do a site plan. So when they have the proper zoning and they're allowed to build, then they have the right zoning to build, or when they do, then they'll do a site plan, which sort of that the city has to sign off on, which shows where their commercial is going to go, where the roads are going to go. So it's a site plan. So they're totally separate. Where I'm a little bit confused when you said that the site plan is not part of the pre-consultation process. So I would assume that they've already done a pre-consultation process to get to that point. But are you talking more about if somebody comes forward with a plan on a site that's already sort of zoned and ready to go, and they want to sort of put, and maybe that's and then they want to put a subdivision or a commercial building on it, then you're just dealing with a site plan. And can you just clarify those two, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so the plan of subdivision creates the actual lots. So typically the site plan process, when people apply for a site plan, it's for one private structure or a private development, commercial development on a parcel that's already been created. So from our perspective, we still would go through the review from an engineering perspective about the entrance, the road access, the servicing, etc. The difference is we do that pre-consultation or pre-meeting with them separately. It's not part of the pre-consultation process. Does that help clarify? I don't know if Chris wants to add in. He's the planner.
No, I understand that. Yeah, I want to get his opinion on the separate streams. I mean, I like that discussion, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. How do we look at these applications when they come in, and instead of well, this one came in before this one, but this one's way more complicated, but this one 3 down the line is a very good for the municipality, but it's a simpler process and we can do it faster. Should we be separating that one out of the stream and saying, can we move it, and I guess it's an argument, well, I guess we can, but how, the other ones are going to take a little bit longer, or does that one get held up because, it's at the bottom of the pile and we have, respectfully 20 other applications sitting ahead of it. So, I mean, I like that discussion. I mean, I think we've always touched on that as a council, that how do we expedite some of these that are simpler? How do we get them through the process quicker? So Chris, do you want to comment on that? And then we'll see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so all of these applications can, if they want to, all be done simultaneously. So you can do an official plan amendment, a rezoning, a site plan, all simultaneously. The difficulty is that the site plan takes a lot more detail. You're looking at providing, facade views of the property. You're looking at the lighting, the parking, the landscaping, how the neighbors are going to be, impacted by this specific development. So a lot of developers don't want to go to that kind of detailed plan before they know whether they're going to get the official plan amendment and zoning amendment in place. So it's a real risk to go to the expense of all those detailed drawings for a site plan application if you don't even know if you're going to get the zoning to allow that development in the first place. So that's why developers tend to separate those processes. Is they get the official plan and the zoning amendment in place first, so they know, okay, now I know I can build this development on this property. Now I'm going to come in for the site plan application that outlines all the details of that specific development. So, you know, a good example, you know, of this issue was, you know, I think it's the Old Dog Brewery in Bob Cajun. Is that the name of it? But that brewery in Bob Cajun. And they went through a rezoning and you know, they didn't want to deal with specifics in the zoning and it ended up, you know, being an issue that cost them, you know, several months of time down the road. But so, you know, we can do all these applications simultaneously, but like I say, it is a risk for the developer if they don't know if they can do that use to start with.
Yeah, but yeah, go ahead, Christina.
Well, I think I would like to sort of separate out the two subject matters. One is simple applications. And truthfully, that you don't need a lot of planners, engineers, managers, et cetera, to work on these if they're all simple. I think it's separating out what is the best fit for our municipality. So which applications, it's not a matter of, the priority isn't about how simple or how complicated they are. It's how well do they mesh with the triangle of approvals. What does our community need? What does our community want? And what is the best fit for that property? And I think if some of the items are better supported because we have the infrastructure in place, or we have the zoning in place, or the zoning doesn't allow that, but it's actually a better fit. If there aren't any natural hazards or natural features that the Conservation Authority is working about. And I think it's more about how more closely can we align our checklist and our pre-consultation process to what is and isn't allowed within the triangle. For instance, we just had an application through pre-consultation, and I know that they're confidential, but there was a lot being proposed. The lot is within the floodplain, and it's everything else in the area that has come in has been told, no, you can't develop in this area. We can't increase the number of people that live in the floodplain. We can deal with those that are in the floodplain. And the challenge is that's not necessarily just an engineering comment. It is, as Chris has said earlier, it's up to council, and so it's the decision makers and the planning authorities under the PPS that make those types of comments. But we all do feed that commentary. And I think it's a matter of, you know, should those types of things be going through pre-consultation, or should there be a sideline, another discussion that's held with them where they say they go and do a pre-check with the Conservation Authority to see if there would be any willingness to allow them to build there. It's not that always when you're in the regulated area that you can't build, but the reality is you can't be completely in the floodplain typically. And the PPS is very specific that way. So I think it's just a matter of where do we want to see the development? And we've committed to some of that through our official plan. And again, our official plan is more recent than our zoning bylaws. So sometimes we have a bit of friction in there. But we are committing on a regular basis through our infrastructure, our capital programming, our operation maintenance, et cetera, to where the services are. So where is it best to grow? Where is it best to support commercial development, for instance, residential development, and anything that wants to come in between? We primarily see those two. It's great when we do hear of an industrial application, trust me. But it's how does that best fit the priority of decision making, and where do you want your efforts from your staff and your timelines, because everybody is working under, you know, time pressure as well. Where do we best align with what we have already chosen to support as a community and as a municipality and through our strategic plan as well? So it's more about trying to get those layers that we review from the outset and trying to align that better and still meeting all the requirements under the legislation. I mean, we have Water Resources Act, we have Conservation Act, we have a lot of other, you know, we have the Municipal Act. There are a lot more pieces of legislation than than the Planning Act only when it comes to the other layers of the development review. And where else we go after that is we're talking right now about planning applications, and I respect that's where you'd like to land now. The development support goes on from not just the beginning of development and getting them through the application and or getting an agreement registered. It goes on beyond that. And we have a site plan on Lindsay Street that seems to be taking forever to build out. And when we get to those scenarios, is there any way as well that we can provide the support? Are they held up because of their own cash flow issues? That's maybe something that we can't help with. Or are they working through layers of approvals or getting the trades in or the contractors, et cetera? And so I see it as, let's start from the beginning. What do we see as a municipality in terms of supporting the development when it comes in? But then how do we further continue that dialogue, that communication? Some people here, because of what we've taken to council in the past, will be aware, but we spend an awful lot of time project managing for our subdividers and our developers that do subdivisions, because we need to keep them on track. We need to have the communication so that when our residents ask us why their street isn't paved yet, why they don't have their sidewalks in yet, why aren't there trees planted yet, we try and maintain that project management role. But it does come from the beginning of, does this development fit this area? From an ecological perspective, a conservation perspective, from an economic perspective, from a servicing perspective, and then we just work our version of a checklist, I believe, to the requirements of all of the pieces of legislation that we have to answer. And so I don't think it's simple or complicated, but I do think some things fit better because of what we've already put in place as a framework for our municipality.
Great comments, thank you. I'm just wondering if it goes back to, and I just want to, I'll ask the committee or the task force if you have any questions or comments, but I think it goes back to my original comment. Would it be possible to help put this in context, to get a list for our next meeting of applications that are outstanding and what stage they're at? And then maybe, if Christina, if you're available, you can join us and we can sort of go through a few of them and put it in context. This one, for instance, doesn't fit with this, and this is where it's at. And this one is a big win for the community, and it's very straightforward. And I'm just wondering if that's a possibility. And then maybe we can go through a few of those, and maybe that'll just help put some of this conversation in context as far as which ones we should be focusing on and which ones we shouldn't. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just thinking that a good example of how applications, have to meet the growth strategy and the provincial policy statement, and you'll probably remember this one, Councillor Mayor Lethem, is the application we got for the old fairgrounds, Colburn and Angeline area. And they originally came in with an application to increase the density on that property to a sort of apartment style density, going from sort of townhouse to apartment. And that was approved. And then a couple of years later, and it was approved because it met, the strategy of creating higher densities within our serviced area and, meeting the goals that have been set out for us in the growth strategy. And then 2 years later, they came back and said, well, now we see that the market is more, is better for townhouses. And so now we're applying to rezone that back to the townhouses, right? And so we actually recommended against that rezoning application, even though they were saying, we're ready to build, we've got the market, we have the demand, we're ready to go. As soon as this rezoning goes through, we're good to go. And we'll bring jobs and people and stuff to the community. And all you have to do is approve this rezoning for us. And we said, no, this doesn't meet the growth strategy. It doesn't meet our official plan. It doesn't meet the provincial policy statement. So we're not going to recommend it. So that actually council turned it down. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, we now have a site plan for a 6-story apartment building on that very site. So sometimes you have to, weigh the immediate return with the longer term benefit in these types of applications.
Yeah, no, good comments as well. And I completely agree. I remember that one. And so just my question to you before I turn it over to the task force, is there any is there any issue with getting a list of applications for the next meeting, where they're at in the process, and just sort of a little bit of a, a little background on each one? We can maybe get it out to the committee ahead of time. We can have a quick look through them, and then we can have this discussion again, maybe putting it into a little bit of a context. I don't even know what I'm asking you as far as work goes, but is that something that you see as feasible for the next meeting, Chris?
Sure, and Sherry Ray, our supervisor of development, has put a list together. It's kind of rough, but just to give you a sense of it, we have 27 rezoning and official plan amendments on the books presently. And then there's, I don't know, about 20 consents. Just to give you a sense of how backlogged we are in our variances right now, we normally see about 4 to 6 minor variance and consent applications going to the Committee of Adjustment each month. We're trying to get 12 on the July meeting, and we're going to have another 12 on the August meeting. So it's going to be a very full days for the Committee of Adjustment. Likewise, we're trying to work on the backlog on the rezonings and official plan amendments and the bigger developments as well. So we've got some pretty hefty meetings coming our way. But yeah, no, we've already created that list. I wouldn't mind tweaking it a bit. I did send it to Rebecca, and I thought maybe we could forward it on to the committee. But I wouldn't mind if, I don't know if you've already sent it, Rebecca, but if you haven't, maybe we can tweak it a bit before it goes out, and maybe put it in a format that's a little easier to understand for the committee. But yeah, that list has kind of been prepared already.
Okay, perfect. And let's include, if you can, like site plans in that as well. Like if it's already has a rezoning and an official plan amendment, where it is in the, are we waiting for a site plan, and this is what stage it's at. So not just the ones at the beginning, and then maybe with the consents, and again, let us know the list of consents or the minor variances, and if there's anything we can do to suggest ways to speed up that process. But I see we got a couple of questions. So thanks for that, Chris. I'll turn it over. Bjorn, you had something you wanted to ask? Go ahead.
No, nothing. I still feel a little bit like a fish out of water with a lot of these specifics we're talking about here. On a very, very simple level, I do understand that they are a web of rules we all have to follow. We can't just have approvals of things that don't agree with the province or any other rules out there. But I still don't quite understand the things that we do have control over, like the meetings. Like we still have a 6-week delay for a preliminary meeting. I don't understand, why do we need to have any delay? Why can't we just beef it up? Like, where I came from, we had some barriers we couldn't cross. We had only 168 hours in a week. We couldn't schedule any more than that. But here, why do we have barriers that we can only have meetings on certain days, only so many hours? Why don't we just go through all the backlog in the one meeting? I don't know enough about it, so I should not be speaking at this point, but that's sort of what I don't understand, and I'm looking forward to finding out why we can't just work a little more and get it done so that there's no wait time.
Yeah, no, please ask the questions. You're not speaking out of turn, and they're good questions, and we all wonder the same thing. It's a process, and there's more to it than that. And I think what we'll do, rather than just go on this too long, Chris, is if we can get that list for the next meeting, then maybe we can put it, like I say, if we can put it in perspective a little bit better and have that, if this is, let's have a discussion about the pre-consultation and the process. I want to move on to a couple other things here before we get too much into this, but I think having that list ahead of us will help us sort of go back to what where we are and put it in a bit of context if we could just do that. So if you can just be patient with that, Bjorn, we're going to get you some answers there. It's bodies, it's hours, it's work has to be done to schedule a pre-consultation, out of respect, and it's not always having all the information. It's so it's just a question, how do we, what's our goal? How would we get that? And we can ask the director, how do we get that from 6 weeks to 2? what could be done to do that. But let's have that discussion at the next meeting if we can, because I don't want to go. Christina, is there anybody else on the task force that had any other questions or comments on just what we've gone over? That was a lot of information. Are we? Christina, did you have anything just as a final? I know you were trying to put your hand up there a minute ago. Is there anything you want to add, or we'll just, if you can come back in the next meeting, if you don't mind, when we have a bit of a list, and maybe we can go through it in a bit more detail.
I just wondered if Director Marshall had any input on where we are with the consolidated zoning bylaw, and whether or not any of that was going to help assist us in reducing the number of minor variances or rezonings that come forward. I just wondered if he had any commentary on that, just to see where I'd like to just map the map forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, we're sort of halfway through a 2-year process on the zoning bylaw. So we have 18 zoning bylaws that were accumulated through the amalgamation of all of the villages and things that were part of the Victoria County originally. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of zoning bylaws to get your head around and understand, and it's very difficult for the developers who are wanting to do development in our community. You have to, one across the street on one side, you got certain rules, and across the street on the other side, you got different rules. So it makes for, and all of these zoning bylaws are very old and antiquated, so they don't have the latest in planning and development ideas. So yes, we're dealing with a lot of variances as a result of those antiquated zoning bylaws, and so we would reduce our workload considerably on the variance side of things by dealing with those. And certainly as part of the process of going through this amalgamating all these zoning bylaws, we're looking at making changes to zoning to match our official plan and make the zoning fit the direction of the community. So, but this zoning amalgamation work does not deal with Lindsay, Bobcaygeon, Fenelon Falls. So the actual sort of settlement areas are not covered by this zoning bylaw. It's a rural zoning bylaw amalgamation. I think 12 of the 18 zoning bylaws are being amalgamated in this process. So it's just the rural areas that are being affected by this particular work. Our next step is to do the urban areas, the settlement areas. So the other 6 zoning bylaws will be dealt with in the next step in the zoning process.
So when do you see the rural consolidated zoning bylaw coming to council for approval before, or are we waiting till we have all the urban areas done as well? Will it all come forward together, or will it come forward in 2 separate pieces?
So it was a 2-year process that we hired a consultant to help us with. And so, like I say, we're about halfway through that. So we're looking at another year to complete that process. And we've had obviously no meetings or public hearings or public open houses on that process, which we need to do to move it forward. So we've been kind of stymied for the last 3 months or so in moving that process forward. But we're looking at about another year to finalize that.
So maybe what I'll just leave us with before we move on is if there's anything that you can think that would speed that process up from a municipal, if it's doubling up on our consultants, or maybe taking that from 2 years to 1.5 years. Obviously, this is going to help tremendously with some of the smaller projects and the workload that you're dealing with for variances and things like that. So if there's any suggestions you might have, even if there's a cost to it, to speed up that process or accelerate it based on the situation we're in, and we're trying to get business recovery, this seems like a pretty easy way if we can accelerate this process to help with your workload and the backlog and move some smaller projects, simplify the process in the long run. It might be worth bringing forward to the task force. Chris, I'll leave it with you, but certainly might be a good discussion to have if there's something that could be done to take that 2-year process and crunch it down over the next 6 months or something. Then certainly I think our group would like to have that discussion. So I'll leave that with you at this point, and you can put some thought into that for the next one if you don't mind. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the task force, from the task force, before we move on to the business recovery? Seeing none, thank you. So we'll move down to item 9, which is business recovery, the engagement. I want to touch base on the engagement strategy. So we had a few things that Rebecca touched on earlier, but I do want to spend a little bit of time on this engagement strategy because it's you all have the document, or it was all sent to you. This is how we're proposing. Actually, I'll let Rebecca speak to it, but this is how we're proposing to sort of take what we're coming up with at the task force and sort of get some feedback from the community. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca and we'll see what direction she's looking for, if anything, and any comments. So go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay. If there's time to give you an update on business recovery activities as well at the end, be happy to do that as well. For the working groups, you were circulated a draft document for how to go about the engagement that you're required to do as a task force by your terms of reference. It's firstly to come up with a strategy of how you're going to engage local businesses, communities, organizations, and industry associations. The other piece that you have is to establish working groups to inform your work. So the document speaks to both of those components and like to focus firstly on the working groups. Where I would like your direction so that we can move forward and implement them. At the current point in time, what is proposed is to have working groups looking at a sector-based working groups. The economic development strategy has 5 key areas for business development and the intentional growth of business sectors. That is agriculture and food, culture, tourism, engineering and innovation, so the technology side of things as well included in that, and manufacturing. Those 5 areas are really important still in how we support economic growth in the community for a number of reasons. But in this context, also suggesting that additional clusters, these are also listed in terms of reference, be considered as working groups to have discussions with to receive their feedback. These being downtown, retail, small business and personal services, construction, and restaurants. The initial plan that's being presented to you of how to go about speaking to these different groups of people is to have a number of virtual sessions with these groups, proposing that we probably set up 2 meetings per sector, and these would be about 1.5 hours in length. There'd be about 8 to 12 participants, so we'd average out at around 10, so there's good discussion. It'd be a structured agenda with pre-circulated questions, so people would need to come prepared to answer questions. And structure it so there's a time for each participant to provide input, and then there's group discussion. And these groups would each identify a list of recommendations and prioritize the top ones to help recovery of their cluster, their sector, to bring to you as a task force for your consideration and discussion. Proposing that we have two discussions or meetings set per sector group, so that we could open up the invitation to whatever business association and or business within that sector that would like to participate. Each of you will, and my team as well, has people that we would like to target to definitely come to those sessions, but we don't know everybody. And this will give the opportunity for anybody in that sector, so a business owner in any one of those sectors, if they'd like to participate, to be able to bring their voice forward. The alternative would be that you as a task force actually appoint people to working groups, and you can choose who they are and go through an appointment process. So that's a bit of an overview of sort of where the document is. The engagement plan is pitched at the current point in time for working groups. From you today, I have a couple of questions for you that were circulated to you. And I'll just read them to you, and then maybe we can have a group discussion so that you can I'm hoping by the end of this, you can send me and the economic development team off to do what you would like us to do so that we can bring information back to you in super short order. So I would like to know how often you would like to receive input from the working groups. How many times would you potentially like them to meet over what sort of periods of months to give us an indication of work planning and input gathering, and also set expectations for those people that are joining. And we'd like to know if you would like to appoint people to the working groups or issue an open invitation. I would like to know how you would, if you would prefer to engage with communities and focus on community recovery. There is a task force that is dedicated to community recovery. So I'm speaking specifically to the economic recovery of communities. And we do have a memo correspondence that has been added to the agenda recently from one community that has been working hard. And I know there are a number of communities that are working hard on their own recovery. And finally, I'd like to know if there's any other engagement tools that you as a task force would like to utilize for people who are uncomfortable with the online platform. We have launched the Jumping Kawartha Lakes engagement platform. It's up online right now. There's a series of questions that any and everyone can go and answer and provide input, thoughts, ideas. We'll be collating that information and bringing that to you as a task force. But if you, as a task force, might want to receive letters or email correspondence or delegations from members of the public who have something to share with you and what that might look like. Those sort of my 4 areas of questions for you, so that you can let me know what you would like, the direction that you have, and we can go away and get it going for you.
Okay, so let's deal with the questions one at a time then. We'll see what the task force wants to do. Your first one was, how often do you suggest we want to hear from the working groups? How many meetings are you proposing that they have? Let's open it up, see what thinks. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is this task force going to be meeting at the same time as all these working groups, or is there 1 or 2 of the task force working with these individual groups? Like, I'm just wondering, are we all going to be sitting, watching, and participating in all of these working group meetings?
No. No, definitely not. I think the role of this task force is as the high level overview. We'll vote on things that, whether it's a recommendation we can make to staff or whether it's a recommendation that has to go to council. But the plan was to lean quite heavily on Rebecca's department through economic development for a lot of our working groups for economic recovery. We can certainly, when she gets a working group set up, she'll let us know they're having a discussion if somebody wants to go in, but there's no expectation that the whole task force is going to participate in every working group that goes on. I think the idea was that they go and get the community input, they gather the information, and then bring that discussion back to the task force so that we can sort of go from there. So I think that was the plan, and Rebecca's nodding, so we'll take that as gold. So go back to the question then. How often do you think we should hear from the working groups, and how many meetings do you think they should have? Any feedback or comments on that? Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, as well, for some, you've got retail and restaurants and agriculture. Those guys are getting into their very busy season. Like right now, forget it. So I don't know what we're going to do about that. Like, we could probably have one very shortly, but as you hit July, I don't know.
Thank you. Any other comments for Rebecca? Any recommendations on how often we should hear? Jill, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think it's cyclical, because there's a recency effect right now where people are in like a survival mode, where there might be more cause for a higher frequency of meetings, even though it does contradict how busy everyone is right now. But then also too, it's a longer term recovery that speaks more to resiliency. So scheduling, further down the road where the frequency could be less.
Yeah, Councillor Vale, go ahead.
I was just thinking, not so much the frequency that the working groups meet, right? But I think there should be, for each of our meetings, a report back from the working groups, right? So depending on how often that meets, whether it's once a week or every 2 weeks for them, because I agree with Jill, because I think off the start, there's likely going to be more meetings groups and then start to taper out as things start to come together, right? And I think you'll see more people, even though they are busy, even though agriculture is busy right now, a lot of those guys have big concerns about how they're going to pull things together, right? So I think there's a lot of interest likely to get something going and move quickly.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think we want to help, and we can't help unless we get their feedback. So I respect that everybody's busy, but I know Rebecca's not proposing spending a whole day in a working session or something. So it's really just, which maybe goes back to appointing people or just leaving it open, right? If you can attend, you can attend. It's an open invitation, depending on what the topic is. But at the end of the day, we can't change the process or help improve anything if we don't hear back from, what the community needs. So, all we can do is try. And yeah, go ahead, Kathleen.
Can we expedite the meetings that they're starting soon? I think that's what everybody's getting to, right? So put it out there and get moving on it. And then they could maybe even, because each sector is different, kind of figure out their own timelines with a guidance from us, maybe. I don't know. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, I might propose, I don't know what everybody thinks, but it might be worth thinking about just, let's get an initial meeting with each working group as quick as possible, just to get any, it goes back to that low hanging fruit, any initial comments that, that we can assist with. And then respecting the fact, get some feedback from the working groups. You know what? Hey, I can meet with you next week, or I can meet with you the week after, but then I'm going to need, I can't meet again till August or something, and just sort of see how each group, how their feedback is and what they feel is important. I mean, we're pretty flexible here, but trying, one size obviously doesn't fit all. So maybe it's just scheduling a meeting as with our working groups as quick as possible. An initial meeting, get some feedback back to the committee, and then we can sort of figure out where we go from there. Does everybody think? Yeah, Jill, go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's important preemptively too that whoever the working groups form into be is that there is the framework that's already been decided. Like I think right now what's going to be happening for a lot of businesses is they're basically developing a new morphing of their business. Right. So they're trying to not only get started and get caught up, but they're trying to train staff to help catch them up. So I think there's a lot of overwhelm going on. And I was fortunate enough to have a couple of customers tell me this weekend that COVID's over. So again, that goes back to the messaging that we're providing our businesses support with, that, we're still being very cautious about our health and safety.
Yeah, no, fair comment. And I think that framework is a great idea. And, it's getting it out there and getting that whole message. It's over till it comes back. Yeah. Not a good, Tom, do you have anything? You're sitting there quietly listening. Do you have anything you want to add to just where we're going with this?
Yeah, I think this is great. I think sooner the better to get it going, and it will take more frequent meetings at the beginning. And just in terms of work and go, and particularly around innovation, I think the college can certainly play a role in that in terms of projects that faculty and students can get involved in that will move things along more quickly, that have some economic impact more in the short to medium term. I think that's where I think we could contribute. But I think a number of frequent meetings to begin, and then less frequent as it moves along. But I think there's some optimism about the opportunities that are coming. I wouldn't say COVID's over, but there's some optimism about it turning around, and there's some opportunities we need to take advantage of.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. So does that give you a bit of direction, Rebecca? Does that help, or are you just what? Does that give you some direction to sort of try and jump on things as quick as you can and get some of these initial ones? I might suggest keep the task force advised when you set up these meetings, because, for instance, Jill might be interested in attending one with your tourism group. Somebody else, Andrew on the Agriculture Advisory Committee might be interested in attending the agricultural one, but we're not going to all attend every working group, but I would certainly be happy to sit on a few and just hear where the discussion's going to get some feedback. So if you can keep us in the loop, I think that would go a long way. So does that give you a little bit of direction to start? Go ahead.
Yeah, so if the task force is good with this, we will set up 10 different working group sessions per sector, if that's okay. Between 8 and 12 people can come and join that discussion. If we get a lot of interest from others, farmers on a rainy day or want to participate, we'll do it as that comes up, because we don't want to exclude people from this discussion. So we'll get them set up in the next couple of weeks, so that the next task force meeting will have some information to give, depending on the groups that have met, with a more fulsome discussion at probably at a subsequent meeting, assuming the schedule that this group goes to. And I do hope that someone from the task force would be keen to join each of these different working group sessions. They'll all be done virtually, so it's going to be a bit of work for the economic development team, and that's a good thing. But just want to acknowledge that working virtual, probably 10 different sessions of virtual facilitation is going to be a new exercise for us and for everybody participating.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a bit of work. You're right. And I think, so you're first proposing to leave it open, just not appoint people, obviously, but leave it open and then have 8 to 12 participate and then sort of close it off. But you go back to your online tools, surveys, and jump in, and some online engagement for people who maybe couldn't be part of the actual session. Is that sort of the complete package you're proposing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, go ahead.
Just further to that, I think, as mentioned, I think the framework's going to be really important, and I agree that we have to have early meetings. But I think the other thing is we got to be aware that for Rebecca's sake and the committee's sake, it doesn't turn into a town hall meeting where people just come to complain. So I think that the framework's going to be really important, and there may be, as councillors or people of this committee, maybe could recommend or suggest people that could contribute to the committee, which might be a good suggestion as well. I'm not suggesting we appoint them all, but maybe we could put some names forward, and because I know that when you turn these into public town hall meetings, what happens, and where maybe our cause might get lost. That's all.
Yeah, no, fair comment. So I think Rebecca's got some direction there. You can steer it how you think is the best way. I think it's important to make it available to different walks of people out there, but at the same time, I think the councillor's right, not just sort of leave it where it just turns into a complaint session about everything that's wrong with everything and where we need to go. It needs to be constructive, and really this is what we're talking about. And if you don't want to talk about this, don't participate in the session. It's almost like we just need to be on top of that moving forward. So you got what you need there, Rebecca? Is there anything else you're looking for regarding the engagement strategy?
Well, going forward for this one, I'm good for discussing with sectors. If you as a committee choose to have discussions on a community related basis, I think that would be a good discussion to have at a later date as this group.
Okay. Is there anything else on the business recovery you want to touch on while we have you? We've just got a few minutes left, so if you've got something you want to go over, go ahead.
Okay, if I can, I'll just I'll give you the high level overview of activities that have happened since the last meeting to fill you in. There is a few things that I apologize, very slow computers today. Here we go. A few things that have taken place. So you did ask about messaging specifically. So the messaging that has come forward and is primarily driven by the tourism marketing campaign is to focus on promoting activities that support the ideas of isolation and freedom. Wide open spaces. Talked about this before, focusing on neighbouring communities and the GTA. We're not looking to introduce new visitors to Kawartha Lakes at this time because we have a really solid market base already. And to Jill's point about safety, so the idea is to appeal to tourists who don't consider themselves as tourists to Kawartha Lakes in general when we're speaking. And this goes very much in line with the message provided. There's a lot of discussion about marketing. So there's two marketing pieces. The first one is a shop local, which is specifically related to economic recovery efforts related to COVID, stimulating the local economy when we've still got travel restrictions to some level. We do need to be building consumer confidence that local stores can keep people safe, and we do need to create a pride of place campaign. So there's different ways of looking at shop local. Some of them, like the one you can see on the left of your screen, buy local, has environmental aim feel to it. Some of them are very fear or driven. Is that shop local is around the feel good side of things. It's a community building tool. The tourism marketing campaign is different again. So we're creating an awareness of Kawartha Lakes as a destination that's close to home with that big, spacious outside. Again, we're looking at the GTA for overnight and day trips, some cottage vacation, family vacation type deals. It is a phased, slow approach. We are not ready to launch this. It's being developed. The Minister of Tourism has advised against getting loud tourism campaigns at this point in time. So we will be taking a slow approach and a campaign that can easily be adapted and modified depending on whatever is the situation that's going on at the moment. So to compare the two of them, the Shop Local campaign is really looking at local residents and cottages. The tourism campaign, which is the GTA and Ontario focus. The Shop Local campaign will have a media kit for local organisations and businesses to participate, and the timeline will be running from July to December is the current plan. I'm driving by my window, I apologise. Tourism campaign, we'll be creating campaigns for summer, fall, and winter because our product offering is slightly different in each of those seasons. We'll have a soft launch with evolving messaging. We're developing the campaign now, but the start date is going to be relatively fluid depending on what's happening in the economy. And all of this gets backed up with business development. So there was a huge discussion about digital transformation at the last meeting. And one of the stats that's come out recently is that about 60% of Ontario small enterprises have a website and only 7% have an online payment system. So our businesses are estimated to be about 2 years behind US counterparts. So we've actually got some programming that we're making sure is available in Kawartha Lakes. The Women in Entrepreneurship program is a virtual program that is just launching and being offered through the Small Business Centre. That leverages other programming that is moving to a virtual platform as well. And we have, since the last meeting, applied to be part of the Digital Main Street platform program. Shop Here is a Shopify, powered by Google. It's a Shopify web transaction program that is now available to our businesses and will be promoted after this meeting. Digital Main Street has come back and will be open on July the 1st, as well as the Future Proofing Main Street program. That'll become open in the next couple of weeks as well, and we'll be ready to apply for that. And there is a Proofing for the Recovery Activation program that is for businesses that are outside of Main Street. A lot of this is thanks to Steve Schwartz. Jump on this. That's the end of that overview. So things are coming.
It's great. Thank you. Any questions, comments for Rebecca? Kathleen, go ahead, or Councillor Seymour Fagan, yeah.
We're not using the term isolation to the public, are we?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Looks like a good game plan. I Yeah, no, I like it. So if everybody's good with that, do you need anything from us, Rebecca, or are you good to go with that? Okay, thank you for that. Much appreciated. I'm going to pass on the roundtable discussion today just because of our time, but I want to go to 13.1. We have a couple of correspondence. One is the news release from the Eastern Ontario Leadership Council, which is really just some statistics from an Eastern Ontario perspective, loss of jobs and economic impact. That's just for information. And then we received another memorandum from the Fenelon Falls Chamber of Commerce, which is offering some good insight from a Fenelon Falls perspective. So perhaps what I can suggest is when you're reaching out for these working groups, Rebecca, is that might be a good group to have a discussion with, and then let's include their comments and everybody else's comments. And then when it comes forward to the task force, we can sort of, it seems like a lot of the things they're suggesting you're already on top of, but maybe they can be included in the bigger picture comments from a citywide perspective. And that's what the task force can look at rather than just from a regional perspective, if everybody's okay on that. Does that work for you? Okay, good. So before I cut off the round table, was there any quick comments anybody wanted to make or add, or anything you just before we? Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
It seems as though there's going to be an announcement very soon from the federal government in conjunction with the province around expanding the funding for broadband access in the Eastern Ontario. It's going to be a very large fund, and it will directly complement the Eastern Ontario Regional Network's work about and broadband expansion. I think EORN is ahead of most other communities in the country, in fact. And I think they're very well positioned to get better funding to finish this off, close the gap. And I'll be directly involved with that project to seek the funding.
That's great news. Yeah, I'm the chair of the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, which EORN is an entity of, and we just did a presentation last Friday to the MPs, the federal MPs, and the minister in Eastern Ontario. Minister Monsef was on the call, or one of her staff were, and it was strictly about our priorities and that broadband ask. The week before, we did a virtual meeting with the MPPs in Eastern Ontario on the same thing. So it's really just going for that, fiber to the home, that $1.5 billion ask. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's not have this discussion every couple of years to try and get caught up. And everybody seemed all levels of government identify this as a top priority. And you're absolutely right. We're pushing EORN because they're best positioned to do it. They've done it before. They have the template. It's a template that can be used anywhere in the country. They're best positioned to do it fast, to do it properly, and they have a proven track record. So we're getting really good feedback from the different people we're talking to, and we're full steam ahead on that one. So we'll keep you posted on that. But that's good news. So hopefully everybody will step up to the plate. There's no way we can go forward with that without all levels of government being involved. So that's good. Any other comments on anything at this point? Okay. So our next, just so you know, we have a council meeting on the 23rd of June, which I've got the memo going forward to waive a couple of simple fees. Our next council meeting is July 28th. So when we're making recommendations to council or updates, I'd like to give an update at each council meeting on what the task force is at. That's our next one on July 28th. And then the one after that is August 20th. We do take a little bit of time in the summer not to have so many meetings. So we'll have one in July, one in August. So July 28th and August 20th. So just keep that in mind. If you've got any recommendations that need to come to council, we need those a couple weeks ahead of time. So I think we'll leave it at that. I'm proposing the next meeting date, if it's okay with you guys, is July 7th. I think it was 2 weeks from now is the day before Canada Day. So I would suggest Rebecca's got her work cut out for her. We'll give her an extra week there to do some reach out. And if that works for everybody on July 7th, I don't know, is 10 o'clock probably work better than 1 o'clock for most? I think it probably does. So we'll stick with 10 o'clock if that was what you were proposing, Rebecca. And then we'll sort of go from there. But I think July 7th, pencil that in as the next meeting, unless I see anybody shaking their head going, no. Okay. all I need then. If there's no final comments, thank you very much for your time today. We cut it an hour and 45 minutes, so I'm getting there. My goal is to get it down to an hour and a half, but we're a little shorter than the last time. So we're going to work on some of those comments. We're going to bring forward some more stuff for the next meeting. Thank you very much again for taking the time to participate. Chris, you got a final comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to let Bjorn know that I haven't forgot about him, and I will give him a call and have that chat that I promised. Sorry, I missed you the other day, so I'll get to you.
Bjorn, while you're on that call, ask him about those pre-consultations. Why can't you get it from 6 weeks down to 6 days? Okay, so put him on the spot and let us know at the next meeting we have our update. All right, thanks, pal. Any other comments? And I'll just ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Mark, you'll move that. Seconded by Chris Marshall. Anyone object? I don't see any objections. Everybody's in favor. All in favor? Passed. Thank you, folks. We're adjourned, and we'll talk to you all in a couple of weeks. Thank you.